I'm Jefferson Smith, fantasy author and host of the ImmerseOrDie Report, bringing you another installment of the 5-Minute Immersion Lab. Today, we'll be talking about the immersive power of names. Whatever kind of fiction you write, one of your key writing objectives is to establish your world in the mind of the reader quickly and with depth. It doesn't really matter whether it's a Star Destroyer engaged in battle off the shoulder of Orion, or a lawyer's office in downtown Manhattan during a hostile takeover. For the reader to immerse in your tale and be able to emote along with your characters, they first need to understand where they are and what rules are in play. A coffee cup hanging motionless in midair would be entirely commonplace on the Star Destroyer, but would be a mind-boggling shock in the lawyer's office. So you need to establish the context as quickly as you can, so that readers can correctly process the images and events you show them. Unfortunately, the method employed by many novice writers is to simply halt the story and insert a pedantic lecture in the narrative voice.
The Krellak were a murderous people, with an ancient history of barbarism and bloodlust. But in the formative years of the 9th agnostic hegemony, Lord Gabulax the Skinless was known for boiling his victims in the Tear.
That kind of high school history lecture wears very thin very quickly. No matter how important it may be to get the context established, doing so in such a clumsy, intrusive manner is about as welcome as bathroom humor in a wedding vow, which, come to think about it, is probably why we call it an info dump. By far the more effective technique is to trickle the information out slowly, ideally only delivering the bits the reader actually needs to know at more or less the time they need to know it, feathering it into the background while keeping the foreground focused on telling the actual story. As their second stab at this, most writers try a finer-grained style of explanation by making short expository asides within the flow of the story, explaining the little oddities as they come up. Like taking a moment to explain why all bus drivers have 2 heads while your narrator is busy punching the daylights out of the coachman's joke teller so he can interrogate the road watcher. Just add a little side comment about the need to keep passengers entertained without sacrificing road safety, and about how Dr. Somebody or other came up with the brilliant, cost-effective solution of grafting comedian heads onto the shoulders of chauffeur bodies. And if you keep it tight, you can probably do it in about 30 words, as I've done here. But did you see what I did before that? By the time I gave you my 30-word version, you already knew most of what I was going to tell you. It was there in the original setup. And I did that without adding a single word of exposition to my script, by choosing evocative names. Suppose I had said, "Well, your narrator is busy punching the daylights out of the coachman's head number 1 so he can interrogate head number 2. In that case, I would have needed to explain what the 2 heads were all about, and my 30-word exposition would have been a necessity. But by simply replacing head number 1 with joke teller and head number 2 with road watcher, I gave you all the explanation you needed without adding a single word. Your subconscious took those names, along with the context of bus driver and 2 heads, and worked out the rest of the details without my having to explain a thing. Better yet, by letting you work it out for yourself, I created another set of dots for you to connect on your own, thereby deepening your engagement in the story and your sense of immersion in the world. It really is a sort of magic trick. The more connections you let the reader find for themselves, the better they immerse and the more they enjoy the experience, provided they do find them. The trick is in getting the balance right. Make the connections too obscure and they'll get frustrated, too easy and they'll be insulted. But it's not just about coining new words to explain the bizarre and fantastical inventions of our stories. The nouns we choose to label things are essential no matter what kind of world we're establishing. Consider another, more well-known example. If I told you that the first man fled across the sand and the other man followed, that doesn't really give you much to build a mental picture with. But what if I said the drunken tourist staggered across the beach and the lifeguard followed. What kind of world does that paint? And what kind of story? It's the same situation, but now the labels are interacting with each other, painting a more specific drama in your mind's eye. And of course, change the nouns, and the story and world being conveyed changes with them, as you can see in the original version from Stephen King. The man in black fled across the desert, and the gunslinger followed. An entire scenario delivered by a fairly plain sentence, all made possible by the choice of specific, evocative nouns. They say a rose by any other name would smell as sweet, but tell your wife you've bought her a chunk of stinkin' stab bush and see if you get the same payoff. Because when it comes to telling stories, the names of things really do matter. Anyway, that's it for today's dose of immersion therapy. If you liked it, why not click like? Or even subscribe, and I'll see you back here next time. But until then, remember, immersion happens naturally. All you have to do is get out of the way.